Good afternoon, folks. Again, I'm your host, Keston Jones, and I'm here on Section 5 for our discussion on police violence and its impact on inducing trauma in communities of color. And today I have with me Mr. Moses McBride. Thank you, Mr. McBride, for agreeing to be a part of this particular discussion. But before I go on, I want to read Mr. Moses McBride's bio so you can find out a little bit more about him and the work that he's doing. So, Mr. McBride is the program supervisor of job readiness at the Fortune Society. He is certified in cognitive behavioral interventions from the University of Cincinnati Correctional Institute and the program coordinator of the cognitive-based fatherhood study called B3. He's a credentialed alcohol and substance abuse counselor in training. Moses has a peer educator and counseling aid in health education and awareness, targeting at-risk populations since 2004. Previously, he worked with Hudson Valley Community Service, providing counseling services. Mr. McBride is currently a David Rockefeller Fund Fellow and a CUNY Phi Theta Kappa student working towards a bachelor's degree in criminal justice at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. So without further ado, Mr. McBride, please tell me more about your work, the work that you do and why it is important to not just your clients, but to communities as a whole.
Absolutely. As a program supervisor at the Fortune Society, part of my responsibility is to help men returning from incarceration, state, federal, or local jails, and transition them into employment. It's one of the biggest hurdles that many men face coming home from correctional facilities across the country, especially in New York. And our job is to make that transition smooth. But it impacts communities, and it's important to communities because without opportunity for the people that are most neglected only leads them to go back into a life of crime and something that also affects society in a negative way. And so we want to kind of let people feel, or let those men and women feel, that there is a safe haven and something to come home to, and they can contribute to society in a productive way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Really appreciate the work that you do. I know a lot about the Fortune Society, and I'm very familiar with your work. So going back to the subject that we're here to discuss today, and in talking about populations and communities that are specifically affected by this, I know for a fact, and based on the previous information that we've shared, that men of color are definitely impacted by community violence, police violence, and so on and so forth. So has the subject of police violence come up in the discussions with your clients or your peers?
Traditionally, police agencies, especially in New York City, they're really familiar with the communities that have the highest levels of violence. And so the clients who come to us are men and women who are exposed to that level of contact with police. And of course, many of those interactions lead to abuse. And that abuse affects our clients deeply. And so, of course, we're having conversations with clients about their interactions with officers in the community, why there's such an adversarial relationship with police in the communities. And we realize that there's something that we really need to do about addressing that and helping people who are involved, even in criminal activities, to believe that there is a reason for police in the community, and outside of them being targets, that there is a need for them to have safe communities as well. But there's a responsibility with police to do better.
Okay, so as someone who works in the community, someone who lives in the community, how does the community feel about police violence, police presence? Dare I say, a overrepresentation of police presence in certain communities, especially communities of color, of lower socioeconomic status. What is the community saying about police violence?
Well, if I would talk to my clients, if we're dealing with them specifically, many of them believe that police target them based on the fact that there is poverty in these communities, and that the poverty itself makes it easier for officers to target them as potential criminals or suspects in crimes, or just in order to harass individuals. And I believe that those relationships tend to escalate. It escalates to a point where there's a lot of resistance, a lot of antagonistic relationships. But when we look at what's going on in these communities, police is not seen favorably. They're not looked at as protectors. They're looked at as individuals who are there to intimidate, people who are there to exert their presence and to create this idea of police force in the community. And so the relationship is definitely torn apart as far as there being any kind of positive relations with especially young men and women in those communities. And so many of the clients feel that the police are targeting them and they view it negatively. Yeah.
So what are some of the things that we can do, or what are some of the things that collaboratively we and law enforcement can do to, make better relationships with communities of color or with the community as a whole?
Well, first,
especially NYPD.
First, officers need to be held accountable. That means that when there's something that is done in a community that is blatantly against the law, that abuse is blatant, that we can see that is really something that has gone way too far, it needs to be handled in a way where someone is responsible for those behaviors. What happens is there's a distrust and a disbelief in the system in correcting the behaviors of officers who are errant. And so communities don't feel comfortable and don't believe that there's going to be any appreciable change because no one is being held accountable. And the other side of the equation is that officers look at the community as enemies. And so if they're walking into a community and see everyone there as an enemy to them, someone that they have to eradicate or remove, then of course there's always going to be tension. And so we need to address, as law enforcement and communities, we need to come together with legislators and judges to make sure that things that are blatantly wrong and abusive are addressed, and it has to be addressed publicly. The public has to have a restored faith in the system by watching the system address those abuses publicly. And I think that is something that is necessary. We need to see that justice is meted out not only for offenders who are dealing drugs or committing robberies in the community, but also for those state actors who are acting outside of their professional authority.
Absolutely, and I concur with the advice that you're giving today. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time out to come and share with us some of the things that we can do as individuals from the community. But one thing I want to ask you to leave us with, any last words about this particular subject. Also, please provide your information for anyone who would like to learn more about your programming or learn more about the work that you're doing.
Great. Well, my last words would be, we have to take ownership of the police activities in our community. And that means that we need to have more of a presence inside of our precincts, community board areas, legislators, district leaders. We need to really make this something that the community as a whole moves in that direction to make sure that everyone is held accountable. That can mean that block associations, project buildings, public housing, tenants need to come out as a unit to address these things. And it should be something that we're doing periodically, maybe once or twice a month, to make sure that our presence is felt. Also, of course, I work at the Fortune Society. You can log on to Fortune Society's website at www.fortunesociety.org. There's some stuff that you can see about what we do there. Many of the programming we work with are alternatives to incarceration. We have court advocacy. We have employment services, educational opportunities, GED, just basically a wraparound services, mental health, and it's primarily geared towards individuals who have justice backgrounds and involved in those areas in which we feel are very impactful for our social communities. And so, please, stop by, visit the website, and join and contribute to the Forge Society, because this is one of the few agencies that really targets the individual in all aspects, and so it's a great thing to join up and be a part of. Definitely.
All right, Mr. McBride. So I'd like to thank Mr. McBride for joining us today for this very important talk. Again, you have his information if you want to hear more about the work that he's doing. You want to hear more about the Fortune Society, feel free to log on to their website. I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in today, and you guys have a great day.